At 4:47 a.m., Venezuelan warships didn't approach the USS George Washington. They surrounded it. From the bridges of those ships, it looked like control. From American systems, it looked like a countdown. Radars tightened. Tracking modes locked on. And a combat system built for global war began calculating outcomes faster than any human command ever could. What happened next wasn't an exchange of fire. It was a demonstration of how modern naval battles are decided before anyone realizes they've already lost. At 4:47 a.m., the Caribbean Sea was calm enough to hide what was about to happen. The USS George Washington, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, moved steadily through international waters, its strike group arranged in disciplined formation. Flight operations were hours away. Sensors monitored routine traffic. Nothing suggested escalation. Then the radar picture changed. 6 surface contacts appeared almost simultaneously, converging from multiple bearings. Venezuelan warship. Not trailing. Not shadowing. Surrounding. Inside the carrier's Combat Information Center, the atmosphere shifted. Not into panic, but focus. Operators didn't raise voices. They leaned closer to their screens. Experience made the distinction clear. This was no coincidence of traffic. These ships were being placed deliberately. The geometry mattered. A guided missile frigate held the central axis, maintaining distance with precision. Smaller combatants closed from the flanks, tightening the ring. Fast attack craft lingered wider, sealing off lateral movement. From above, it would have looked less like a patrol and more like a net. On the bridges of the Venezuelan ships, radar arrays rotated with purpose. Frequencies narrowed. Beam patterns sharpened. One by one, sensors shifted from search mode to track. That transition lasted less than a second. On American ships, it triggered something far larger. The AN/SBY-1 phased array radar aboard the escorting cruiser detected the frequency change instantly. Fire control precision signals intent, not curiosity. Within fractions of a second, the data was handed to the Aegis Combat System. Threat classification began automatically. Hull types were identified. Weapons databases cross-referenced. Missile ranges calculated. Engagement envelopes projected. The system didn't ask why the ships were there. It calculated what they could do and how fast. Across the strike group, the same picture appeared everywhere at once. Destroyers, carrier, subsurface asset, air wing. All now shared a single, synchronized understanding of the situation. From the Venezuelan perspective, nothing dramatic happened. The carrier didn't turn away. Aircraft didn't launch. No warnings were broadcast. The American formation held course as if unaware of the encirclement. That was the miscalculation. Modern naval warfare does not announce itself with movement. It announces itself when systems align, when sensors, networks, and response layers quietly lock into place. That alignment had already occurred. On Venezuelan bridges, officers believed they were exerting control. That surrounding a supercarrier would force caution, dialogue, restraint. They believed proximity created leverage. What they didn't realize was that proximity had already been translated into numbers, seconds, distances, probabilities, and once a confrontation reaches that stage, it no longer belongs to commanders or politicians. It belongs to mathematics. The moment Venezuelan radars shifted into continuous tracking mode, the situation crossed a line that no radio call could undo. Inside the USS George Washington strike group, the change was detected instantly, not by human instinct but by machines designed to notice what people cannot. A subtle tightening of frequency, a narrowing of beam patterns, precision where none was needed for navigation. To American systems, that precision meant intent. Within 0.3 seconds, the AN/SBY-1 phased array radar aboard the escorting cruiser registered the shift and handed the data to the Aegis Combat System. Threat classification escalated automatically. No discussion. No debate. The process was procedural, rehearsed thousands of times in simulations long before this morning. 6 surface contacts were analyzed simultaneously. Hull types identified. Displacement confirmed. Weapons databases cross-checked. Missile guidance requirements mapped. Engagement envelopes projected across a digital sea that no longer resembled the calm water outside. The system prioritized targets without emotion. The Venezuelan flagship was flagged as the primary concern, not because it was closest, but because it carried the longest-range anti-ship missiles. Aegis calculated the required radar illumination time for those weapons to function correctly. Over 80 seconds. It then calculated its own response window. Less than 5. That difference defined the encounter. What made the imbalance absolute was not just speed, but integration. The moment Aegis reached its conclusions, the data did not stay on one ship. It flowed instantly across the entire carrier strike group. Destroyers, carrier, subsurface asset, air wing. Every platform now shared the same tactical picture in real time. Above the carrier, F/A-18 Super Hornets were already airborne. They had not launched in reaction to the encirclement. They were airborne because U.S. doctrine assumes escalation before it becomes visible. Each aircraft carried Aegis harm missiles, designed to home in on radar emissions the moment they persist too long. From their altitude, the jets were invisible to Venezuelan sensors, masked by distance, curvature, and coastal clutter. Their pilots did not need visual confirmation. Radar activity alone was enough. The Venezuelans never saw them. Instead, they began noticing something else. Radar returns behaved strangely. Contacts appeared to drift without explanation. Range calculations conflicted between consoles. At moments, the carrier seemed to exist in more than one position at once. Operators recalibrated. Engineers checked systems. Commanders requested confirmation. What they were experiencing was not malfunction. It was electronic warfare. American EA-1AG Growlers, operating beyond detection range, had already mapped Venezuelan radar and communications frequencies. The encryption in use, purchased decades earlier, was familiar territory. Their transmissions were not just intercepted. They were understood. As Venezuelan officers debated anomalies and sought guidance from higher command, American systems tracked every message in real time. Delays that felt insignificant to humans were decisive in a confrontation driven by machines. While the Venezuelans tried to understand what they were seeing, American platforms were already positioning for what came next. Above the surface, the airspace was controlled. On the surface, targeting solutions were complete. And beneath the water, something far more dangerous was already waiting. While Venezuelan commanders focused on the surface picture, the most decisive element of the encounter remained invisible. Beneath the calm Caribbean waters, the geometry of the confrontation had already collapsed against them. U.S. Navy doctrine never allows a carrier strike group to move without subsurface dominance. Long before the Venezuelan ships closed their ring, attack submarines had been tracking every major surface contact in the area. They did not maneuver dramatically. They did not rush into position. They simply adjusted depth, speed, and angle, quietly aligning firing solutions that required no further refinement. Sonar operators aboard the submarines listened, not for noise, but for patterns. Each Venezuelan ship produced a unique acoustic fingerprint: propeller cavitation, engine harmonics, auxiliary systems cycling on and off. Those signatures were catalogued, tracked, and predicted. Once confirmed, the submarines no longer needed active sonar. They could follow their targets in near silence. The Venezuelan fleet never suspected they were being watched from below. At Strike Group Command, the tactical picture now had depth. Surface contact, airspace control, subsurface positioning, all layered into a single, synchronized framework. This was no longer an encounter. It was a closed system. The moment the Venezuelan ships completed their encirclement, American planners recognized the opportunity. From a tactical perspective, surrounding the carrier simplified everything. It meant every hostile vessel was now inside a known engagement envelope. A hammer and anvil geometry formed naturally. From above, aircraft held radar dominance and missile reach. From below, submarines controlled lethal angles that surface defenses could not counter in time. On the surface, Aegis-equipped escorts filled the gaps, overlapping sensor coverage so completely that no movement went unnoticed. The Venezuelan fleet had surrounded the carrier. In doing so, they had surrounded themselves. Inside Venezuelan command spaces, uncertainty spread. Radar inconsistencies continued. Communications experienced brief, unexplained delays. Orders had to be repeated. Confirmation took longer than expected. None of it felt catastrophic, but together it created hesitation. That hesitation was deadly. U.S. systems registered the slowdown immediately. Engagement probability models adjusted in real time. Reaction windows widened. Success percentages climbed. From the American perspective, the confrontation was already over. No missile launches were required. No warnings were issued. No escalation was necessary. The situation had reached a point where firing would add nothing to an outcome already decided. The Venezuelan commanders began to realize something was wrong, not because of what they saw, but because of what they couldn't confirm. They could not locate American submarines. They could not reconcile radar discrepancies. They could not establish confident targeting solutions on the carrier itself. Every calculation they attempted returned uncertainty. And uncertainty in naval warfare is defeat. As minutes passed, the Venezuelan formation loosened almost imperceptibly. Distances increased. Bearings shifted. What had been a ring began to resemble a cautious perimeter. From the outside, it looked like de-escalation. From the inside, it was recognition. They were no longer in control of the encounter. They were inside it. The first Venezuelan ship to break formation did not announce its movement. There was no radio call, no dramatic maneuver. Its helm adjusted by a few degrees, just enough to increase distance without signaling retreat. To an outside observer, it looked insignificant. To American systems, it was decisive. Aegis registered the change instantly. Course deviation. Speed variance. Formation integrity dropping below optimal thresholds. Algorithms recalculated probabilities not for escalation, but for collapse. The Venezuelan encirclement was unraveling. Inside Venezuelan command centers, pressure mounted quietly. Radar operators reported inconsistencies they could not explain. Sonar contacts refused to resolve. Communications with higher command lagged by seconds that felt longer than they were. Each request for confirmation produced more questions instead of clarity. Commanders faced a choice they never expected to make. To escalate meant committing to a fight they could not clearly see. To hold position meant remaining inside a tactical box that felt increasingly dangerous. And to withdraw, slowly, cautiously, meant admitting something far worse than defeat. It meant acknowledging loss of control. American commanders never forced the decision. That was the point. No warning shots were fired. No orders were broadcast over open channels. The carrier strike group maintained course and speed, projecting indifference so complete it bordered on arrogance. Jets remained airborne but distant. Escorts held position. Submarines stayed silent. Everything signaled restraint. Everything signaled confidence. As Venezuelan ships widened their spacing, Aegis tracked every adjustment, every hesitation. Engagement envelopes expanded and contracted with mathematical precision. At no point did American systems lose the advantage. In fact, with each moment of delay, the imbalance grew. The Venezuelan flagship slowed slightly, attempting to regain coordination. Smaller vessels followed, unsure whether to tighten formation or disengage further. Orders were issued, revised, then reissued, each revision consuming time the Americans could afford and the Venezuelans could not. From below, submarines adjusted effortlessly, maintaining ideal firing angles regardless of surface confusion. From above, aircraft continued to dominate unseen airspace, their presence implied rather than displayed. The reality became unavoidable. If missiles were fired now, they would not arrive together. If radar illuminated targets, it would invite immediate suppression. If one ship acted alone, it would be isolated instantly. Every option led to the same conclusion. The Venezuelan fleet was inside a system designed to win wars without fighting them. The decision to withdraw was never formally spoken aloud. It happened through motion, through widening gaps, through headings that pointed subtly toward coastal waters instead of open sea. One by one, the ships disengaged, not fleeing, but retreating with dignity preserved only by silence. The USS George Washington never altered course. By the time the distance became undeniable, the confrontation was already over. What remained was acknowledgement, unspoken, but absolute. The carrier strike group had not pushed them back. It had simply waited. And waiting, in modern naval warfare, is often the most powerful weapon of all. By sunrise, the Caribbean looked exactly as it had the day before. Calm water, clear skies, no smoke, no wreckage, no evidence that anything extraordinary had occurred. And yet, every commander involved understood that something decisive had taken place. The Venezuelan warships were now well outside effective range, their formation dissolved into cautious spacing as they returned toward coastal waters. No official statement followed immediately. No declaration of victory or defeat. Silence became the final message. Aboard the USS George Washington, operations continued uninterrupted. Aircraft cycled through routine check. Deck crews moved with practiced precision. From the outside, it appeared as though the carrier had simply passed through another stretch of open sea. But internally, the encounter had already been logged, analyzed, and archived. Not as a confrontation, but as a demonstration. Modern naval warfare no longer begins with gunfire. It begins with data. With sensors detecting intent long before intent becomes action. With systems like Aegis evaluating outcomes faster than human thought, reducing complex geopolitical risk into mathematical certainty. The Venezuelan commanders had believed proximity equaled pressure. They believed surrounding a supercarrier would force reaction, hesitation, negotiation. What they encountered instead was a force that did not need to react. The USS George Washington did not maneuver aggressively. It did not threaten. It did not warn. It allowed the opposing fleet to observe its own irrelevance in real time. That restraint was not weakness. It was dominance. Every element of the carrier strike group had worked exactly as designed. Sensors fused seamlessly. Electronic warfare shaped perception. Subsurface assets denied confidence. Air power remained invisible but absolute. At no point did the system demand escalation to achieve control. That is the reality of 21st century sea power. Wars are no longer decided by who fires first, but by who can fire first, everywhere, all at once, before the other side understands the fight has already begun. For the Venezuelan fleet, the lesson was immediate and unmistakable. Their ships were modern enough to appear threatening, but not modern enough to survive inside a fully integrated battlespace. They were surrounded not by weapons, but by a network they could neither see nor disrupt. And networks do not blink. The USS George Washington continued its mission without deviation. To the world, nothing had happened. To military planners, everything had been confirmed. Supercarriers are not relics. They are not symbols. They are moving command centers of layered, invisible power. And when surrounded, they do not feel trapped. They feel at home. Because by the time a carrier strike group allows itself to be encircled, it has already ensured one thing beyond doubt. The fight is over, long before the first shot is ever fired.